We finally discovered what Thatcher Demko's Achilles heel is.
He didn't make a lot of progress throughout the summer.
This is Demko?
Yeah.
I feel like I hear a different thing every day.
Demko may or may not be ready. It's kind of been tight-lipped.
Kind of black cloud hanging over a camp when your superstar goalie has no idea when he's going to play.
It's troublesome.
Rick Tocchet saying there's no target date right now with Thatcher Demko. This thing has gone on for a long time.
And it turns out it's the Popliteus. I'm going to explain exactly what it is, how I can totally appreciate that this is a vulnerable area for goalies, and how you can safeguard your Popliteus and potentially your career. Let's get at it. First things first, I think we should head upstairs to the office so I can break down the anatomy for you so you kind of understand exactly what it is, because there have been a lot of people on like the podcast just reading the Wikipedia thing about it. So I'll kind of explain what it is, and then we'll come back down here, talk about what positions as a goaltender put it at risk, and then talk about some potential solutions. Cheers.
And he is gone from the game now.
Okay, let's go through the anatomy. So this is a picture of the front of the knee. This is a left knee. The tibia is on the outside. It's a tibia. The fibula is on the outside. And it's fibula, not fibia. Tibia. This is the tibia. And this is sort of where your kneecap sits. So these are the femoral condyles. This is the medial side. This is the lateral side. So the medial side is the inside part of your knee. And you'll see this medial femoral condyle is actually a little bit longer than the lateral femoral condyle. It isn't just bad artwork. It's a combination of bad artwork, but it actually is like that, which is going to be important in a second when we talk about something called the screw home mechanism. But this blue would be your MCL. This would be your hamstrings, medial hamstrings, lateral hamstrings, which really kind of come from across. But this is your LCL, your lateral collateral ligament. These little green dishes are your lateral and medial menisci, which are kind of like a little, sort of like a little jelly donut that sits in there to give a little bit more cushioning and a little bit of depth and congruence to the tibial plateau where these femoral condyles meet to make the joint, because it's not like a very stable joint. Like you sort of have your tibial plateau and then your femur, and it's not all that stable. So we have the ligaments and we have the ACL and the PCL in there that help give it that security, but the menisci give it a little bit of extra depth. This here where I've made a little hash mark, that's your tibial tubercle, and that's where all of your quadriceps come down, and these hamstrings are behind. They're in behind. But your quadriceps are in the front, and they come down, they kind of engulf your patella, and then they all attach here to that one spot. So if you wonder why kids get Osgood Schlatters or you get sort of jumper's knee, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of stress on that structure. So this is from the front side. You'll notice there is no popliteus here because the popliteus is on the back side. So let's have a looky-loo at the back side. So this is the back side of your knee, and there's a lot going on here. Let's just go over the anatomy really quickly first. So this is called the popliteal fossa, sort of that gap in that sort of space in the back of your knee, right behind your knee. And this again is the lateral side. This is the medial side. This is your LCL, lateral collateral ligament. This is your MCL. The hamstrings would come down and attach to your tibia, but I didn't put them in because I thought it would make it a little fussy, so that's why I put them on the other one. These are your medial and lateral menisci again. This is your fibula, tibia, and then over top of all this would be your gastrocs, your soleus, your big muscles. So we had to peel all that away, and then we get at the little popliteus. So it's kind of a cool looking sort of sail-shaped muscle, triangular muscle, and so it comes from the lateral aspect of the femur, the lateral femoral condyle or epicondyle, and then it comes underneath the LCL. So it's underneath that. It's quite deep in the joint. And then I made a little gap because it has a little hold on to the lateral meniscus. It has a little attachment there. And then it comes down, has this broad attachment on the medial aspect of the tibia. So it does a couple of things. Let's back up to this screw home mechanism that I mentioned earlier. When you straighten your knee all the way, partly because of this difference in the sort of the symmetry of the femoral condyles, your tibia kind of externally rotates a little bit on your femur. And this is a really helpful mechanism. And when you're in that position too, your ACL and your PCL kind of come into tension. So the passive structures, meaning non-muscular structures of the knee joint, make it very stable. So that's why we can stand for quite a long time without like our quads like burning, like if we even did like a quarter squat and tried to just stand like that, we wouldn't last all that long because our muscles would be really fatigued. The screw home mechanism lets the passive structures of the joint kind of take the load so we can kind of hang out there. Our hamstrings can't pull around a corner. They just pull in a straight line. So if they just started pulling, really they're just pulling the knee together. They're not flexing the knee really. This is where the little popliteus comes in, because the little popliteus, it does a little medial rotation of the tibia, which unlocks that screw home mechanism, and now it can flex like that. So that's really and then its other job, it has that little, it's just hanging on to the lateral meniscus, posterior horn of the lateral meniscus, because also when it contracts, it unlocks the screw home mechanism and the knee flexes, it pulls that little bit of the meniscus out of the way a bit, because otherwise it's vulnerable to get pinched when you flex your knee. So it's just like, I got you. Which is like so, like, can you believe it? Like this evolved, like it's crazy. But so that's what it does. It is a medial rotator of the tibia, but we'll go back down in the lab, and because you'll be thinking, okay, well when do we use medial? We think it's the medial rotation that's the problem, and it could be, but I'm also going to explain sort of another little function that you might not naturally think of. So let's head down to the lab and go through a few things. Now that you have a better understanding of the popliteus than most second or third year kin students, fourth year graduates, I'm gonna do a little art. So popliteus goes from the lateral femoral condyle, epicondyle, down to the medial border of the tibia, crossing the back of the knee, something kind of like this. A little hard to draw on yourself. Also, keep in mind, I think I should make this a little more up here. Keep in mind that it goes under your lateral collateral ligament. So it's a sneaky little rascal, and it's deep to all this stuff. So I've got my gastrocs, the two sort of heads of my gastrocs, my soleus underneath there, other stuff under there too. So it's in there, it's deep. So we can see when it shortens, it turns my foot inward. So it is a medial rotator, as we talked about upstairs. So you think, well, when do I medially rotate my tibia? And we talk about the screw home mechanism upstairs too, and I heard somebody say, oh, well, that's important when your knees lock straight and then you go to unlock it, so maybe it's important if you're a runner, but if you're a hockey goalie, you're not often standing with your knees straight, which is totally, totally right, but doing its job isn't stressful for it. So its job is to help with that, like unlock that screw home mechanism of the knee. If I'm just doing my job, that's not stressful. If someone comes and dumps a whole bunch of stuff on me that I don't know how to do, and I'm not educated to do, I'm not experienced to do, now we have a problem, and now I'm under stress. The muscle is exactly the same. So doing its job is fine. Even if goalies did stand with their knees locked all the time, it's fine. When do we do? So you're thinking, well, what's the problem with that medial tibial rotation? Well, you know what? We do use medial tibial rotation anytime we decelerate from a T-push. So if I do a T-push, I glide out here, and then I decelerate by internally rotating at my hip, but also at my tibia. There's that force on it. So that is a time when I use it. And if I'm doing a lot of repetitions, if I'm on the ice, well, I'm getting a lot of work, and so maybe that's a little bit more work than what it's accustomed to. So that could lead to some sort of overuse injury. But what I immediately thought of was, okay, so this is the thing you don't, sometimes in anatomy courses, in university anatomy courses, you learn the action, the concentric action. What happens when it shortens? When it shortens, it medially rotates the tibia. What about, what movement does it have to decelerate? So what movement is it lengthening under tension? Well, it's the equal and opposite. Tibial external rotation. Well, let's think about, when do we tibial externally rotate? Anytime we go in the butterfly, anytime we go in the RVH. Now that muscle is under tension, but it's lengthening. And lengthening action is more stressful on a muscle than a shortening action. So now it's in a position doing something that isn't really its job, with quite a bit of load on it, and sometimes a lot of force too, or I should say a lot of intensity, or like impulse, sort of a rapid lengthening under tension. But even anytime I'm in my butterfly, moving from my butterfly, now it's in a lengthened position, getting a little bit of pull on it. So you can see pretty easily where that could add overload to such a small muscle doing something that isn't its job. And then it's going to get chronically irritated. Is it torn? I don't know if it's torn or not. Usually when you tear a muscle, there's an incidence where you tear it. What I think is probably more likely is that this is an overuse injury, especially since it's taken so long for him to recover from it. So there's going to be an irritation, a chronic inflammation of the muscle or of the tendon, more likely, that's going to take a long time to get over. What I also think is, this isn't just about the popliteus. There's a reason that muscle is getting used more than it should, why it's getting used to the point where it's exceeding its load capacity, and now it's getting irritated and injured. Remember upstairs we talked about how it has that little attachment to the posterior horn of the lateral meniscus. It helps kind of pull it out of the way as your knee flexes so the meniscus doesn't get pinched. Well, is there an issue there? It works in conjunction, it sits right behind that lateral collateral ligament. Is there a little bit of ligamentous instability in the knee, which is causing the popliteus to sort of try to stabilize the knee more dynamically? So I think this is usually the location of the problem isn't the cause of the problem. It's the symptom and it's what's taking the brunt, but there's something else going on that's causing that little muscle to get overloaded. It's not the popliteus's fault. Something else is to blame for that.
Demko with the right pass.
And we do love to blame someone, especially when things aren't going right or our favorite goalie is missing the start of the season. And so we think, well, what was the coach doing? What was the trainer doing? Well, and we want to sort of blame someone. But these types of overuse injuries are often from cumulative trauma. And it also, again, varies based on individual anatomy. If I'm trying to be a goalie and I'm predisposed to have, my hips are predisposed to external rotation versus internal rotation, then there is going to be a lot more load on my hips, my knees, my ankles. Sometimes my biomechanics just are working against me, which makes me vulnerable for some of these injuries. The other thing to keep in mind, and it's something, when I work with goalies in the game-winning goalie formula or turning pro, it's trying to figure out, okay, what's your total volume? So I always want to know, what's your team workout like? What's your on-ice schedule? When are you skating with your goalie coach? What else is going on? What else is putting force on these joints? Because I might design the world's greatest program, and there's nothing wrong with the program in and of itself, except now this goalie goes and does something else over here with the team trainer. And then they have their private goalie coach workout where their goalie coach is trying to teach them to do short little T pushes where they're decelerating over and over again. And then they go to practice where the coach is working on post integration. So they're sliding into the post, and now we look at all this volume together, and that's way too much for the knee. So we want to try and coordinate what's going on with all those different ingredients. It's like, if you're making spaghetti sauce and someone is coming in and just adding a little more salt, and now it's sort of spoiled a good thing. I think this is also where you have to be aware of identifying yourself with the workhorse mentality. And we hear on TV, and I talked about this in another video, be wary of who you take your advice from, because we hear TV commentators or podcasters, oh, they're a workhorse and they're out there an hour early and they stay an hour late and they do extra in the gym. And so you hear that and you think, I want to be like that because I want to be like that goalie. And I admire that work ethic. But if you're not working on the right things, you're just adding load that eventually, this stupid little Popliteus is costing this guy months off of his career and potentially millions of dollars in earnings. So you want to just be working smart, working hard when it's time to work hard, but always working smart and trying to find that right balance. Our job is to find the minimum effective dose. What's the least amount of work we can do that's going to give you the most amount of return with the least wear and tear? Now, how do we reduce our risk? How do we train against this? Because I do have techniques that I use.
Demko on brink.
I can't say that I started adding these exercises to my program because I was worried about rampant Popliteus injuries in the goalies that I train. But looking at the RVH and looking at that tibial rotation, it is important that we try to maximize the amount of mobility that we have in that tibial femoral joint, but also that we learn to control it. So not just stretching it, but sort of teaching the muscles, including the Popliteus, how to control that rotation and add some stability to the movement. So I've talked about this in other videos. If you're in the game-winning goalie formula or turning pro, you know that we do some knee cars. We do some tibial rotation, pails and rails to build strength through those outer ranges. We'll also use super bands for an assisted. So to do an assisted RVHs, we don't really do a lot of kind of like full sort of weight bearing, like loaded, slow rotations like that, just because I think it adds quite a bit of load and it isn't really similar to how we load the knee in practice. And I mean in practice on the ice. So we'll do assisted movements using the Superband, assisted RVH, some assisted butterfly, so that we can give it an element of load, but really, really watching the dose to make sure that we're not putting too much stress on some really small structures that kind of aren't designed to do that. And if you're a coach or a trainer watching this, or a strength coach, our job is to bridle our goalies' enthusiasm sometimes. It's like a kid, kids maybe I wanted to eat Captain Crunch every single day as a kid, but my mom would only let me have it on a Saturday, because it wasn't good for me. I was so enthusiastic about it. It made me really, really happy, but it wasn't the right thing for me to be eating every day. We need to be the same sometimes, and I certainly did it when I was a baby strength coach, is you love their enthusiasm and you love how hard they work and you want to feed that and fuel that, but what you do is sort of end up pushing them down the wrong path and even developing habits that are going to be counterproductive to their long-term career prospects. So we need to say, no, that's good. That's all we need to do. Doing an extra 10 isn't going to make the difference, and actually holding back that 10 really is going to make a difference. So we need to be the grown-up in the room. To sum it up, Popliteus is a small little rascal of a muscle that is happy to do its job. When we start asking it to do something that it isn't its job, or we have some compromised biomechanics, just maybe based on our individual variation in anatomy, it's going to get cranky. And when it's like when the Popliteus ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So we need to be a little bit mindful of it, and we can help reduce the risk of these types of injuries by thinking about these movements when we're training, but doing it with the right dose and making sure that we're not adding too much volume. Again, I think typically these injuries are from overwork, over volume, which isn't any one individual's fault. It's, everybody's putting in their 2 cents, and now we've got too much volume. So that's a little insight into Mr. Demko's injury, and I hope he's feeling better and back on the ice much sooner than later. If you have any questions, comments, drop them below. If you thought this video was a little bit interesting, mildly interesting, give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. I will catch you next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. I love you guys.